When the world first entered lockdown last year, I made a video about habits to avoid as a creative. Now, things aren't totally back to normal yet, but as we begin to get back on track and resume creating things that we may have had in the back of our minds during isolation and quarantine, I think it's time we flip our conversation from last year on its head and start thinking about habits we should strive to implement into our lives as creators. So, here are 5 ways we can minimize friction in our workflow and better bring our visions to life. I haven't always been big on setting overarching concrete goals that guide my every move. Typically, I've only felt it's really necessary to set personal or professional goals when I really feel a passion toward achieving something. Setting the right goals for you in the right ways is a giant leap when it comes to actually improving as a creative. When setting goals, it's important to implement systems and steps to actually give tangible structure to that goal. The structure I typically follow looks something kind of like this. First, pick what it is you're going after. If you're having a hard time narrowing down what it is you want, my best advice is to start big picture and then begin to narrow it down from there. An important piece to remember is that a goal does not always have to be a traditionally smart goal. I think a lot of us have this weird sort of instinctual need to overcomplicate goal setting. When we do decide to take on the task, it always feels more exciting when the goal is something, grand or complex. The truth is that a goal is a goal no matter how big or small. I mean, it can honestly be something as simple as just simply wanting to be less stressed. Let's say your goal is to become a professional videographer. Well, developing a plan for something like that may be overwhelming or frustrating simply because the goal itself is maybe too broad or even may seem a bit out of reach. So instead, break that main goal into smaller, more actionable steps in order to work toward the bigger picture. Next, identify problems or roadblocks and prioritize the most effective solutions and steps in order to work around them. The third step, design a detailed and thorough plan, and then finally push through to completion. Don't let anything stop you, especially yourself. It sounds simple enough, right? But sometimes that's not always the case. As I've gone through these steps time and time again, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, I've realized that goals can oftentimes make you unhappy. I've made the mistake of attaching my own happiness to a goal way too many times. The best way I've found to avoid this cycle is to measure the gain and not the gap. When reflecting on the progress you've made, instead of looking at how far you are away from achieving the goal, instead look at how far you've come from where you first began. The likelihood is that you've probably made more improvement than you would realize. Another way to look at this, which many of you have probably heard of before, is it's about the journey, not the destination. This transitions us pretty well into our next point to improve as a creative, which is experiencing failure to find your success. When dealing with failure, the worst thing you can do is to deny it. Look, we've all been there. You took on a project, personal or professional, that just straight up tanked. Most of the time, I think a lot of us tend to just sort of sweep it under the rug and move on because it's easier to ignore the pain and embarrassment than to just accept it. But in order to find success, you ultimately need to take responsibility for your actions and own your outcomes. Take time to look at cause and effect relationships within your workflow or within a specific project. Did you have poor communication with a client so the project just kind of flopped? Or maybe you procrastinated over and over and you ended up missing a deadline. In all reality, the list can pretty much just go on and on as to why a project may have failed. The reason for failure may even be completely out of our own control, but it's important to take time to reflect on your process, identify any weak points and aim to turn them into strengths, or even just look for ways around those problems. I'm a firm believer that weaknesses don't really matter if you can just find solutions. In all reality, for creators like us, this is something that should really start to become pretty second nature for you in order to continually find success, especially given the constantly changing and demanding industry that we're a part of. Another way we can improve as a creative is setting deadlines for your personal projects and sticking to them. Being self-employed, like a lot of us creatives are, comes with a lot of freedom. I mean, you can literally set your own schedule when you're not working on things like client projects. It's pretty great. But on the other hand, this can lead to a lot of procrastination. I think it's a pretty common thing to not really set a strict deadline for yourself when it comes to your own work or your passion projects. It's sort of like, when it gets done, right? But you procrastinate for so long, you keep putting it off, and eventually the passion for the project just isn't there anymore. In my opinion, it's those personal projects and those passion projects that will help you grow and develop more as an individual and a creative than things like a client project really ever will. So take those deadlines seriously. And when it comes down to it, it's more than just keeping a neat calendar or setting reminders and alarms. You have to be disciplined and hold yourself accountable. After all, a lot of us are our own bosses. It's not like you're gonna have somebody yelling at you for watching 2 hours of YouTube videos rather than doing that editing work that really needs to get done. So take the rest of this year to practice being just as disciplined with your personal work as you are with your professional projects. You'll end up being a much more well-rounded creative if you do. So advice that's commonly given to creatives to improve is to take on any and all projects that come across your plate. Don't get me wrong, I think that's good advice, but I think there should be a pretty big asterisk that goes along with that. When taking on a project, whether it be personal or professional, you're going to experience the most drive and ambition toward that project when it falls somewhere in the range of not too boring, but also not too challenging. Now, I get it, you're like, duh, that's kind of obvious, right? But when we actually break it down and look at the psychology of it, it can really help us out a lot here. If it's something that's too boring, you're probably going to end up losing interest way too fast or procrastinate and just end up putting it off because the workload simply isn't enticing enough to take seriously. Plus, there ends up being little room to challenge yourself or to educate yourself or just to learn a new skill. My advice would be to take boring projects and spin them in a way that would make them more interesting to you. Let's say you're shooting a B-roll sequence, and more often than not, you use 60 frames or 120 slow motion to make everything look cinematic. Well, maybe try shooting it in 24. Try and challenge yourself and change things up from your normal routine. Just change up your normal workflow. Now, on the other hand though, if the task ends up being too challenging, you might actually end up in a similar boat to the first scenario, because it can become so daunting to even think about where to begin. Your anxiety levels go through the roof when you even think about getting started. So maybe back things up a bit, dumb it down or seek out help. Or maybe honestly just even wait until your vision becomes clear and you have the necessary skill set to get the project done. The takeaway here is that there is a line between the two. It's a place that sits maybe just a step, maybe 2 steps above your current skill set, where you can create that spark and find passion, and your vision and work will flow easily. And it's in this space that you will find a genuine excitement for what you may be able to create. The final way you guys can aim to improve as a creative as this year continues is to expand your creative network. Now, I know this is something that I've touched on in quite a few of my recent videos, but I figured that this is something important to expand on a little bit more for you guys. I believe that not a single person on their own has everything they need to produce successful outcomes 100% of the time. And what I mean by this is that I don't want those in my life, especially the people who I work with, to be exactly the same as myself, with all the same strengths and skill sets. I want to surround myself with people I can learn from and people who can carry me in ways that I can't carry myself. And I also want to bring things into my relationships and work that other people can't. A key that I've personally found to expanding your creative network is to seek out people who ask great questions, and vice versa, seek out people who have great answers to the toughest questions. I recognize that for a lot of you, this is kind of an area of this industry that's a little intimidating, like reaching out to somebody, especially if they're bigger or more experienced than you. In my mind, probably the most important thing to remember here is that when working with other creators in this industry, the relationship is always a give and take. So if you're deciding to reach out to somebody, maybe to learn from them or to shoot with them, make sure you have some value to give to them. One really big piece that I don't think a lot of people really take into account is that if you are local to a creator, that is a huge piece of value. And the reason is that you'd be really surprised just how often creators like myself just need an extra set of hands on a project we're working on. So don't be afraid to shoot a message to that local photographer or videographer that might be in your area. The truth is that they're people just like you and I, people who struggle with creativity and finding inspiration and motivation. They go through a lot of the same struggles that we all deal with. So send them a message, but make sure it's actually something genuine. Try and start a conversation with that person. Don't don't be one of those people that's responding to every single story and sending DMs that just literally say, yo, let's link and shoot, fam. It's important to respect people's time and boundaries. A genuine message goes a long way. You know, something saying, hey, very inspired by you and your work. I'm available here. I'm local to your area, something like that. And I think you'll be surprised at just how many more responses you'll get. Improvement is something that really isn't always simple. And from personal experience, watching a video like this can even overwhelm you more if it's something you're looking to try and do yourself. The truth is that you don't need to implement all of these steps tomorrow. Find the one that resonated with you the most and slowly begin adopting it into your life. Improvement also doesn't always come in the most obvious ways. You just need to be open to it. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up the video here, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you know, this self-development, self-improvement type content, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Let me know what kinds of other topics you'd like me to cover. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.